Elizabeth Hartwell clutched her carpetbag as the stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Deadwood Gulch. Dust swirled around her blue traveling dress, the same one she'd worn to answer Thomas McKenna's advertisement for a God-fearing woman to share life on a prosperous cattle ranch. His letters had painted pictures of green pastures and a sturdy homestead where they'd raise children and build a future together. The driver helped her down, his weathered face grim. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss? Ain't been safe out here since Custer's last stand." Elizabeth smoothed her skirts, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Mr. McKenna is expecting me. We're to be married tomorrow." The driver shook his head but said nothing more. As the stage rumbled away, Elizabeth stood alone on the dusty main street. Deadwood Gulch was rougher than she'd imagined. Saloons outnumbered churches, and hard-faced men watched her with curious eyes. She hired a wagon to take her the final 8 miles to the McKenna ranch. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, grew increasingly uncomfortable as they traveled deeper into the territory. "Ma'am, I don't like the look of this," he said, pointing to smoke rising in the distance. "That's coming from where the McKenna place should be." Elizabeth's heart began to race. As they crested the final hill, her worst fears materialized. Below them lay the charred remains of what had once been a ranch house. The barn was a skeleton of blackened timber, and scattered across the yard were the carcasses of cattle, bloated in the afternoon sun. "Sweet Jesus," Pete whispered. "We need to turn back. Now." But before they could move, a figure emerged from behind the ruins. A boy, no more than 12, stepped into view holding a rifle nearly as tall as himself. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face streaked with soot and tears. "Don't come any closer," the boy shouted, his voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "I'll shoot. I swear I will." Elizabeth's maternal instincts overrode her terror. She climbed down from the wagon despite Pete's protests. "I'm Elizabeth Hartwell," she called out gently. "I came to marry Thomas McKenna. Are you his son?" The boy's rifle trembled in his hands. "Pa's dead. They killed him 3 days ago. Burned everything." His voice broke. "I been hiding in the root cellar, but I ain't got nowhere else to go." Elizabeth approached the boy slowly, her hands visible and empty. "What's your name, son?" "Jimmy," he whispered, lowering the rifle slightly. "Jimmy McKenna. You really came to marry my pa?" "I did." Elizabeth knelt to his level, her heart breaking at the fear in his young eyes. "Who did this, Jimmy?" The boy's face hardened with a hatred too mature for his years. "Crenshaw's men. Said Pa owed money to their boss in Deadwood. Pa said he didn't owe nothing, but they didn't care. They shot him down like a dog." Pete shifted nervously on the wagon. "Ma'am, we can't stay here. If Crenshaw's gang comes back." Elizabeth ignored him, focusing on Jimmy. She could see the boy was near collapse. When had he last eaten? "Jimmy, honey, you can't stay here alone. Come with us back to town." "No." Jimmy's grip tightened on the rifle. "Pa's buried out back. I ain't leaving him. Besides, they got the whole town scared. Sheriff's in Crenshaw's pocket. Ain't nowhere safe." Elizabeth looked around at the devastation. In the distance, she could see a small wooden cross marking a fresh grave. Her heart went out to this brave boy who'd lost everything but refused to abandon his father's memory. She made a decision that would change both their lives. "Then I'm staying too." Pete's eyes widened. "Lady, you've lost your mind. You can't stay here." "I came here to build a life," Elizabeth said firmly. "This boy needs help, and I'm not leaving him alone." She reached into her carpetbag and pulled out her small savings, everything she had in the world. "Pete, please. Take this and bring back supplies. Food, medicine, lumber, nails. Whatever you can manage." Jimmy stared at her in disbelief. "Why would you stay? You don't even know me." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Because everyone deserves someone to care about them. And because your father was going to be my husband. That makes you family." As Pete reluctantly agreed to return with supplies, Elizabeth surveyed the ruins of what was to have been her new home. The kitchen was partially intact, and the root cellar where Jimmy had been hiding was still functional. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That night, as they sat by a small fire in the ruins, Jimmy told her more about his father. Thomas McKenna had been a good man, trying to build an honest life after the war. He'd written to Elizabeth not just seeking a wife, but hoping to give Jimmy a mother. The ranch had been small but profitable until Jasper Crenshaw arrived in Deadwood with his gang of hired guns, claiming ownership of half the surrounding territory through fraudulent land grants. "Pa stood up to them," Jimmy said, staring into the flames. "Said he had legal papers. That's when they killed him." Over the following weeks, Elizabeth and Jimmy worked to rebuild not just the physical structures, but their shattered lives. Pete proved true to his word, returning with supplies and even helping with the construction. Other local farmers, inspired by Elizabeth's courage, began quietly offering assistance. Elizabeth discovered she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Her soft hands became calloused from handling lumber and tools. She learned to shoot Thomas's old Colt revolver, practicing until she could hit a tin can at 20 paces. Jimmy taught her about ranching, animal care, and survival skills his father had passed down. But their progress didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, 3 riders approached the ranch. Elizabeth recognized the leader from descriptions, Jasper Crenshaw himself, a pale man with cold eyes and a perfectly trimmed beard. "Well, well," Crenshaw said, dismounting with theatrical flair. "The famous mail-order bride. I heard you'd taken up residence in this burned-out wreck." Elizabeth stepped onto the porch, her hand resting on the revolver at her hip. Jimmy flanked her, rifle ready. "This is private property, Mr. Crenshaw. You're not welcome here." Crenshaw laughed. "Private property? I'm afraid there's been some confusion, miss. This land belongs to me now. McKenna's death voided his claim." "That's not how the law works," Elizabeth replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "The law is what I say it is in this territory." Crenshaw's smile faded. "I'm being generous, giving you one last chance to leave. Take the boy and go back east where you belong." "And if we refuse?" Crenshaw's hand moved to his gun. "Then you'll join Thomas McKenna in that grave out back." The standoff stretched for long moments. Elizabeth could feel Jimmy trembling beside her, but the boy held his ground. Finally, Crenshaw remounted his horse. "You have until Sunday to be gone. After that, I won't be responsible for what happens." He spurred his horse, and the 3 riders disappeared in a cloud of dust. That night, Elizabeth and Jimmy sat on the porch, watching the stars. The boy had been quiet since Crenshaw's visit. "Maybe you should go," Jimmy finally said. "This ain't your fight." Elizabeth put her arm around the boy's shoulders. "Yes, it is. Your father wrote me that he wanted to build something good here. Something worth fighting for. I may not have known him, but I know what he stood for. And I know you're worth fighting for too." Jimmy leaned against her, and for the first time since his father's death, he cried. Elizabeth held him, her own tears falling silently. She thought of the life she'd left behind in Boston, safe, predictable, empty. Here, facing danger with this brave boy, she felt more alive than she ever had. Sunday arrived gray and cold. Elizabeth and Jimmy had spent the days preparing, checking weapons and fortifying the house as best they could. They weren't running. They'd made that decision together. As the sun reached its zenith, riders appeared on the horizon. Not 3 this time, but 8. Crenshaw had brought reinforcements. Elizabeth felt her mouth go dry, but she kept her voice steady. "Jimmy, remember what we practiced. Stay low, watch the windows, and don't shoot unless you have a clear target." The boy nodded, his fear masked by determination. "I won't let them hurt you, Miss Elizabeth. And I won't let them hurt you." Crenshaw's voice carried across the yard. "Last chance, woman. Come out now, and we'll make it quick." Elizabeth stepped onto the porch, her revolver in hand. "This is our home. We're not leaving." The first shot came from one of Crenshaw's men, splintering the porch post near Elizabeth's head. She dove for cover as gunfire erupted from all sides. Jimmy's rifle cracked from the kitchen window, and one of the attackers yelped in pain. The battle was fierce but brief. Elizabeth managed to wound 2 of the gunmen, while Jimmy's surprisingly accurate shooting kept them pinned down. But they were outnumbered, and ammunition was running low. Just when hope seemed lost, new voices joined the fight. Pete appeared at the barn with a shotgun, and behind him came a dozen local farmers, all armed and determined. The tide turned quickly. Crenshaw, seeing his men falling back, made one desperate play. He charged toward the house, gun drawn, screaming curses. Elizabeth stepped into the open, her revolver steady in both hands. "This is for Thomas McKenna," she said quietly, and fired. Crenshaw fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. His remaining men, seeing their leader wounded and outnumbered, fled into the hills. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended to, Elizabeth and Jimmy stood together in their yard. The ranch was still damaged, still incomplete, but it was theirs. Pete approached, grinning despite a bandage on his arm. "Reckon Crenshaw won't be bothering anyone for a while. Sheriff's finally found his backbone. Says he's issuing warrants for the whole gang." Elizabeth looked down at Jimmy, who was trying hard to look brave despite his tears. "So what now?" the boy asked. Elizabeth smiled, putting her arm around his shoulders. "Now we rebuild. Together. Your father wanted to create something good here, and that's exactly what we're going to do." As the sun set over the Dakota Territory, Elizabeth Hartwell realized she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for. Not the husband she'd come to marry, but a son who needed her and a purpose worth fighting for. She'd come west to marry a farmer, but instead she'd become something stronger. A mother, a protector, and a woman who could face anything the frontier threw at her. The ranch would be rebuilt, the cattle would return, and Jimmy would grow up knowing that sometimes the best families are the ones forged not by blood, but by choice and courage.